Wow, this is new. This
Hey
goes.
everyone, excited to I know Austin was on the podcast in the past. Excited to for those of you who don't know who Austin Walker is, we actually met each other through accomplishment coaching, which is this magnificent coaching program that was really intense, where we really got to dive deep into our I would say doing a lot of the inner work. And Austin since then has started his own coaching practice. That was during the first episode. That was during the beginning stages of when you launched. And I'm sure there's so much to talk about and update everyone on, but just wanted to introduce you guys to Austin Walker.
Yo, what's up, team? Good to be here. This is the first time that I've done the podcast and on the Facebook live stream, which is cool. So shout out to Davidson for innovation. I'm very, it's great to be back, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned it. I think our first conversation was probably, or podcast was what, 2021?
Yeah, 2 years, almost exactly 2 years ago. Yeah.
Well, I feel like I was talking about this with somebody the other day. If you're in solopreneurship or entrepreneurship, a year feels like dog years. So it feels like a decade since we last had a
Uh,
conversation. So yeah, it's good to be connected. Thanks for having me.
yeah. I mean, it's not easy to double down on yourself, right? I think we all go through the golden handcuffs stage at some point in our lives, where you've had such really amazing jobs at great companies with good training and benefits, right? I'm sure there's some of those
Oh yeah.
benefits that you miss a lot.
Mm.
Um, but it sounds like you're doing things that ultimately, yeah, it not only is it mission driven, right, but it fills your cup. It gives you purpose, and I'm sure there's a lot of ups and downs. So I'm sure we'll go through that as well. Like you said, since it's been 10 years since since that all happened.
Well, you preface that by a very particular word, where the easier route, right? And isn't it so funny how easy, and I can even speak into my own experience, it is to do the thing that's easier versus the thing that you want. I think that's a
Mm,
really important distinction, which
mm,
you mentioned it earlier, why accomplishment coaching was such a powerful training container. It was the first time in my life where I was like, whoa, hey, actually, what do I want?
mm.
It's fascinating to look back where, right, I'm 34. I'll say it like a 7-year-old. I'm 34 and a half years old right now. And for 31 years of my life, I essentially, had success by a lot of societal standards,
Mm.
but it was essentially creating a life based off of the things that I should be doing. And anytime
Mm.
you're in the should category, it's like, all right, let's pump the brakes and let's take a look at this for a moment.
Mm.
And yeah, it definitely takes, the first word that came to mind was courage, but I think the real
Mm.
word behind it is a truth, to lean
Mm.
into something that may be off the beaten trail or something that isn't easy or convenient, which
Mm.
is just a perfect almost like segue to kind of parts of what this conversation that you and I've talked about integrity.
Mm.
And it just feels like this experience, this phase of my life is really bring into question integrity, and what does integrity mean to me, and how does one live a life of integrity. And
Mm.
it's cool because I know we're talking about career and how we generate for ourselves, which is an important part of the lived experience, but integrity isn't just a thing that you do, right?
Mm.
Integrity is something that you are. It's like an embodied experience. So
Mm.
I think it's a cool thread to further explore. But
Mm.
I'll land the plane there. It's always really interesting to look at, well, what are the things that we put in the way of what we actually want, and is that
Mm.
intentional or is that just what we've learned to do?
Mm. I, yeah, I love what you just said, right? I do think, society, I mean, especially with social media and just media in general, right? There's so much, oh, got to go to college, got to get a degree. And I know you were a collegiate athlete as well, right? And that in
Mm-hmm.
itself comes with its pressures, right? Performance, and who am I if I'm not breaking records, if I'm not getting to the next level, getting drafted by the, like, oh, does it mean I'm less than if I'm not drafted, right? There's so many layers to it. And then also, both of us being people of color, right? There's also expectations of how we can operate in a room, right? Um, at the boardroom when working on business deals and things like that too, right? So, but I love what you said about integrity and it is tough, right? Because you want to, your parents have opinions, your partner has an opinion, your friends, right? I'm sure folks at accomplishment coaching have everyone has an agenda, right? So it's really just doing the inner work to figure out like, okay, is this actually what I really want for myself? Or is it just the next step, like the next easy step, just because everyone else around me is doing it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors that you even just shared there. I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, which is essentially the foundation of it is collect resources. And there are
Mm,
different avenues to collect resources, and resources equate to value. So I think it's
mm,
one just to acknowledge the system, not that there's anything right or wrong with it, but just understand, well, how that might influence things
mm,
and what we deem as the right thing or the wrong thing. You mentioned
mm,
identity and different cultural elements that may influence what our North Star is or what we deem as right or wrong. And I want to acknowledge all those factors because it plays a part into this. But I think it's this fundamental element of, at least in my experience, why do you do what you do? Right. Or like truly, it's always the simplest questions that I feel like have the biggest impact. What do
mm,
you want? And for your reasons. Because to
mm,
your point, we live in a world where everybody has a view or opinion of what we should be doing. Friends, partners, spouses, peers, right? Even on social media, people who, let's see, men in their mid 30s, there's an idea of what they should be doing
mm,
and what success looks like.
mm,
And I think it's easy to get swayed or to influenced by others if you're not actually grounded in what the thing that you want and you can stand for that. And
mm,
it sounds simple, but I think that's a really important distinction, which to your point, why, we use this term inner work is so impactful because it actually allows you the opportunity to get some elevation
mm,
outside of the way that we've learned to live life and look
mm.
inside, which even as somebody who is in the inner work and wellness industry, I still don't spend enough time actually just looking inside and taking
Mm,
a pause and a beat just to say, is all the things that I'm doing in alignment?
mm,
And right, I think if they are, then right, you can be with other people's opinions and they can have it, and you
mm,
can acknowledge and be with it and still be committed to what your path is.
mm,
Or even there's these higher levels, particularly if it's a spouse or family or friends or people that you really care about. It doesn't have to be a, well, it's my way or nah, like the highway. There can be even this idea with the people that you love of like, how do you integrate your truth with like other people's truths?
mm.
But I think all fundamentally, it's really anchored down on this. Well, what's the experience that you're standing for your reasons?
Wow, that's deep. I mean, there's so many layers that we can
And
unpack.
I know we're opening a
Um,
lot of doors. We're opening a lot of doors.
I- so that's great. I do think folks that are of service, right? Folks like you and I who are coaching, who are being a contribution in the world. Sometimes we're so caught up in the, oh, I have to be there for others. I have to support my clients that ultimately we forget sometimes we neglect our own needs. Like, whether it's like just time to relax or do you still do the fifth week off or how's that going for you?
Well, so fifth week is a structure within accomplishment coaching, just for everybody who's unfamiliar with that, where they take the last week of each quarter off as like a built-in wellness. So if nothing else, you have 4 weeks of vacation a year. And for myself, I do, but my role with accomplishment coaching has shifted a little bit. So I am an auxiliary coach for them as opposed to on their leadership development team. So
Okay.
my role has shifted a little bit, but to answer your question simply, I do, but it's more so on the flow of my schedule.
Hmm. Yeah. That
I,
yeah,
I think to the original point though, taking time for wellness is essential. I feel like being
yeah.
in this work, I'm more attuned to just how important it is.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things, it's almost like drinking water. You can never not drink
Hmm.
enough water. It's like there's
Yeah.
constantly drink more water.
Hmm.
And I look at it myself is particularly from coming from a corporate space where corporate spaces are essentially designed to how to get the most productivity out of your workers between like a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And particularly in some industries, right, maybe even as former sellers, there's been a focus to pack it as much as you can and do as much as you can. And, you've heard elements of this hustle culture, which in some instances, those can be really serving. But if you're talking about a holistic well-being, and if you're doing that day in and day out and not taking the appropriate steps to recharge, refuel, and source, then breakdown is likely going to happen. So I'll say how I take care of my physical, emotional, spiritual well-being is a much higher priority in my life. Whereas in my corporate space, it wasn't something that I consciously thought of. It wasn't like oh, well, I've had a really tough couple of days. I need to do something specifically, go on a walk, go on a workout to really fuel me. It was just a kind of go, 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 go. Whereas now it's like, actually, that's not the experience that I want. And I also understand the impact of it when I'm not sourced, right? I actually can't show up as fully and as presently as I want for my life commitments.
That's deep stuff, man. And I think even as a male in our society, right, or the outputs and the results and the outcomes is, or at least in the past, now it seems like a little bit more balanced, right? But I would say most men probably still feel that added pressure of being that like provider for the family, whether it's providing security, both through physical and like protection sort of, and also financially, right? As being someone who provides to the family and saves and takes care of the family and all that as well.
Well, it's interesting perspective, particularly as I feel like as we like advance in our society, we're looking more at gender roles and what does that mean? And I think there certainly are gender roles where you talked about this element of being provider, and it's more of like the man's role of being a provider. So it's an interesting thing to look at. One, in the sense of, well, how can you both provide like and take care of yourself, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be an either or. Like, how do you actually have harmony? And I'll tell you, it's been even something as a solopreneur, somebody who left a very plush tech sales role in terms of just security and right getting a specific high check just for having a pulse every 2 weeks, to being in a space right now where I do create abundance for myself, but it's definitely a lot more variable. I can have a month where it's like, oh, great, we made $4,000 this month, followed by a month where we made 32,000. So it varies greatly as opposed to just the consistent. And so I'll share, that thing came up to me a lot when I was going into my own solopreneur journey, because, those things do come in mind. It's even things that I look at with today, like there's an impact for everything. And part of an impact of leaving very structured corporate spaces where, yeah, you might be able to bank a little bit more, was for, I don't know if sacrifice is the right word, but for the intention of creating a business that creates all of the experiences that I want, that I get to be a manifestation of my purpose and serve in the way that I want, and also have abundance. Whereas I didn't have that in my previous structure. To kind of land the plane on it, I think it goes back to like the intention behind it. Because one can be like, oh, I left it. Oh my gosh, I'm not making all this money that I did in the way that I did beforehand. But it's like, oh, well, actually, no, I actually specifically did that for this specific experience. And I'm actually reinvented my relationship with my finances and creating it in a way that's really aligned with me. And there's no make wrong around that. And in the process, you're right, those thoughts around, oh, so you're 34, you got to provide, like, it's being with all of it, but like not making myself wrong for the thing that I chose and like owning it.
So deep, man. I mean, it's clear that you've done the work, and only until we do the work can we be clearing, or else we will be projecting our own needs and insecurities. And if we come from survival as coach, right, then a lot of it's unconscious, right, where we don't even know we're projecting our stuff onto their stuff, right? So
Totally. Well, even just when you said that, I think about how easy it is, even just like as other men, to compare ourselves to other men, right? And to kind of like size each other up a little bit. And I don't even think in a malicious way or anything like that, But it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, what's your job title? Wait, how much
Mm,
do you make? Right. Let's,
mm,
and right. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's just this, oh, it's an interesting awareness in my view of how we'll be quick to compare ourselves to somebody else versus comparing ourselves to ourselves and like the
mm,
vision of thing that we want for us. And I think it kind of goes back into part of just like the environment that we're in. But I think it's also a
mm,
really empowered experience where you can be around other people. Let's say so much in our country is based off of what you generate and how much money you make. But you can be around somebody, let's say hypothetically, who makes 3x as you, but still look at yourself as like whole and complete as
mm,
exactly as you are, not making yourself wrong for that. Right.
mm.
I think that's a powerful thing. Or if it was vice versa, let's say you make 2 or 3x more than somebody else, but not looking up and being like, oh, well, I make more than them. So, right. I'm this big shot. It's like, right. Everyone, I think, is just, again, you're on your own journey. And what does it all mean for you?
Hmm. That's deep, man. Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, I've been guilty of being this righteous person who's like, oh, that person, I should not hang out with that person because he lacks integrity in the world of like, just flirting with girls, who he's being around like other women, right? And it's like,
Mm,
who knows like what agreements they have going on in their relationship, right? But it's my assumption. It's I go into this like holier than thou, like, oh well, I'm a good person because I don't do any of that, like
oh, juicy. That's good. Can we, I think that's a really important topic. Can we like play with that a little bit? So
yeah.
in that instance, is it like, all right, well, like as a married man and seeing like, let's say, would this be like other married people or people who are in committed relationships and they might be like flirty or
Mm.
like, what's
Yeah,
the,
it could be, like, hmm. I would say yes. There's like different layers to it, right? For me, it's like, okay, like, is this person like even able to like attend his kids and his, like recitals and seminars and concerts and games and stuff like that? So it's like there's judgment from okay,
mm,
like what are his values? And then if it's different, like if it's like a lot different than I am, like let's say they're working 80 hours a week, right? Well, I'm like, psh, well, I work 40 hours a week and I'm able to get my stuff done. So like this person like doesn't know like his priorities, right? So there's just like a lot of judgment around what I deem is like the right behaviors, right? Oh, this person should say thank you when someone's holding the door for them. And then
mm.
then I get like pissy about it. It's like, who cares, man? Like, I should just live my life. Like, why am I going around being like judgmental for no reason?
Well, we're all to normalize. We like judging is a human, like it's a human experience. Like I love the phrase, and I used to say it a lot in my life. Hey, judgment-free zone, which is impossible. We're always judging. I think the
Mm,
more accurate thing is like I'm a judge, but I'm not going to make that judge. I'm not going to hold that judgment against you, right?
mm,
And I think that's another cool element of like doing some of the inner work and getting awareness around it. Because if you're not aware if you're having a judgment and you're just like,
mm,
oh, that clown, right? He's spending 80 hours of work. He's not doing all this. Then you're relating to that person differently as opposed to be like,
mm,
oh, I noticed have this judgment. And all right, now I can choose to be however I want with that
mm.
person. And that
Yeah.
choice might be like, all right, like I'm gonna choose to like judge anyways, or it could be like, all right, I'll do my thing. But like the awareness is such a key part of it. And I think it's also an interesting thing because when you said it, the thing that came to my mind is that, well, as a man of faith, um, like don't judge any man who sins differently than you do,
Mm.
because it's like I mean I believe again as a man of faith, like all humans, we are all sinners and we sin all of the time, and so
That's true.
right
That's a
and
fact. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's this interesting element that I really try and look out for myself as well. It's, particularly around judgment or it's like, because look, every man has their light and their shadow in their areas where they're really great and their areas
Mm,
where they're still working at it. And
mm,
so really trying to step out of a place where it's like, I think it's just to like have more compassion where each man may be in their
mm.
journey or like where like what they choose and that
Yeah.
choosing doesn't necessarily influence like my choosing.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so it's just, again, you can probably hear, if coming from another coach, you probably hear like the unattachment in it, which is hard to do, by the way,
Mm,
right? It's like to actually just allow people to be for exactly as they
mm.
choose, even if that thing's
Yeah.
not the thing that you want, but it's also can be so freeing too. So it's just like, I think it's just a fascinating byproduct of being in this work too.
Man, this is so deep. I'll come clean because we're talking about honesty, integrity, and all
Yeah,
that.
let's go.
Like even prior to this conversation, I'm like, oh, doesn't even want to do this podcast. Like it seems like he reschedules. Like we're not doing our like whatever checkups that we used to do anymore. So I had all these stories where I'm like, oh, like is Austin gonna be like, does he even care about this? And I was like, and then hearing us talk, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I had all these judgments, right? And then I'm
Oh,
like, this is such a beautiful conversation, and I'm just present to it all. So thank
well,
you.
that's so cool, and honor the vulnerability and even sharing that. And it's, when I hear that, there's an impact for how we show up, right?
Uh,
And that's also an edge for me in where I'm in my journey right now. I kind of look at
yeah.
it as like an edge in my leadership. And leadership can also just be like responsiveness, how much you're connecting with somebody else. Are you rescheduling? Are you where you are when you say that you're going to be it?
Mhm.
And because from my perspective, it's like, oh yeah, like I'm pumped and ready for this. And in the
Oh,
whirlwind of different things that are going on in my life right now, it's just like sometimes I struggle in the communication in between. But it's a
yeah.
great example, because if we had just gone on judgments and been like, man, this guy Austin, he doing too much right now, and he rescheduled. Nah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the thing that I hear for myself is, and this is so AC, there's this idea of like, well, based on like how I'm showing, like what's the experience that I'm enrolling other people in, and like
Mm,
what might have been the thing that may have been like more vulnerable or just really more connected to my truth, that could have had it been like, yo,
mm,
hey, Davidson, this is actually where I'm at.
mm.
Not to say that the experience, you still may have had the same experience, but like, what's the thing that I can give to it, right? So I
Yeah.
just, I think even in something like that, there's always this like beautiful nuance and responsibility, because I hope that's like responsibility for like, oh yeah, that's totally on like how I showed up versus like, oh, Davidson, you thought this way, even though I'm here, right? Like you can hear there's just like a layer of like ownership and even just different
Mhm.
layers of how you can be in it.
No, I love, I mean, it's clear that, you've done so much work on, and we talk about work like it's, I guess how I describe the work is like it's just very clear that you've been very intentional about your goals and taking care of yourself and how you show up and taking responsibility and all that and accountability. That's beautiful, modeling that behavior. So thank you for that. Um, and oh yeah, I'm catching up with Trey later on or tomorrow actually.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, great. Shout out to Trey. Yeah, he's the man. I miss him. We texted a few weeks ago. Him and I play a little bit of cat and mouse too. We actually have a hold, like a quarterly hold for when we were supposed to get connected. And just the lives of Solopreneur, it's more of like
Mhm.
a loose hold where it's like, it's more of a reminder. Now is the time that we need to get back on each
Mm,
other's calendar.
ah,
We may not meet at this time, but it's like alert, alert. Sometime within the next few weeks, do
aw,
something.
yeah.
Yeah, he's one of one. He's a great guy.
Oh, I know we keep switching gears, but I wanted to double click on what we were talking about with the other men and how they show up, right? I
Hmm.
think it's interesting, right? Because I inherently, and it sounds like you agree. I think everything we say or do is always going to be projection, right? Even if we clear, and for those people who don't know what clearing is, Austin and I graduated from accomplishment coaching, which is this year-long training program, and there's an exercise that we are suggested to do every day where we list
Mhm.
our fears, our concerns, and our complaints, and ultimately that helps us get to a place of completion, which means that we don't have any leftover energy. We're not holding on to the past. Like we can just simply just be a clean, empty slate. But anyways, I mentioned that because even I personally think even if we do all the work in the world, which clearly both of us has done a lot of that, which is why we've stayed connected. Um, Everything is inherently a projection, right? So when I do see other men that are might be really good with women and they have women, from my perspective, I have a story that they have women eating at the palms of their hands, right? Like guys that are
Mhm.
just very flirtatious, or guys that I don't know if they have an open relationship, whatever it is, right? Like I have my judgments, and even my own insecurities and my own fears were like, oh man, like how's this guy able to be so smooth with the ladies when like I have trouble even like saying hi, to that beautiful lady over there,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much around. This is a loaded topic around just men's engagement and relationship with women, because it's something in a lot of my spaces that I'm having intentional conversation around, where it's how did we learn how to be around women? And so it's this interesting experience where, at least for a lot of my 20s, really close up until my time with accomplishment coaching, I had a really disempowered relationship with women. And I'd say just, yeah, just women holistically.
Hmm.
And all right, I grew up and I was heavily in. Here's the thing that I love around it. If so much around women is associated with like sexual relations, particularly as like teenagers and coming up at that, what is people's like first experience with sex?
Hmm.
It's generally porn, right?
True.
Like
Yeah.
generally most like young boys, I would assert, is
Yeah.
they see porn. And if
Right.
you look at like porn's representation of how men are to be with women,
Hmm.
it is generally showed as very male pleasing, and women are more of like objects or to please a
Hmm.
man. And I think it's really interesting because those are the initial things that a lot of men have in how to engage and to be with women.
Hmm.
And I know even in my own experience, you mentioned that I was a collegiate football player, and there were so many amazing things that I got from the game of football.
Hmm.
One of the things that wasn't particularly great was like my relationship with women.
Uh,
And in a football context, and again, as a 18 through 21-year-old man, a lot of it was focused on like women were like it was like a game. So like my
hmm.
relationship with women was gamified in
Hmm.
many respects. And so I share all that to say it's just that to be really present of even how we learn of how to be with women. And for a lot of men, and I think this is even especially true for men of color, there's generally a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, or even just to get connected. What is the relationship that I want to have with women?
Hmm.
And that question in itself probably ties a lot back to maybe some of the things that you're pointing to earlier. Maybe the relationship that you have that you own that's in your truth is maybe you're like more flirty. Maybe that's just how you really intentionally want to be. That's
Hmm.
right. Or maybe it's just something that you've kind of learned to do, and there's actually not a real strong association where as to like what's the experience that I'm promoting here. And then
Hmm.
of course there's all these other different factors of, are you in a committed relationship, are you single? But I think fundamentally it's how do you want to engage and treat women, or right, or men, like whatever your sexual preference or orientation is. But it's again, it's really hard in my opinion to have a idea of the experience that you want, like if you haven't claimed that,
Hmm.
then it's just like you're kind of relying on what you've learned. And
Hmm.
some of the things that what you've learned or societal norms may actually not be aligned to your truth.
Yeah, I also hear like you're not making yourself wrong, and even in you sharing, thank you for being vulnerable, about like gamifying, like especially in your college days, right? And I'm sure you received a lot of attention, right? You're obviously a tall, good-looking dude, and I'm sure extremely in shape, especially during that time in your period. And there was some element of fame like associated with that as well, right? But I also hear that you're not making yourself wrong, and there's no shame, and there's a forgiveness, and like, hey, like who I was being was maybe not in alignment with like who I want to be long term. But yeah, there's clarity in that, so I appreciate that.
Well, it's this idea of like hindsight's 2020, right? I mean, yeah, if I had known what I know like now, then my relationship would be fundamentally different, but it would have been a completely different arc. And so
Hmm.
that point that you meant around like stepping outside of shame and guilt, I think is really important. And again, I keep emphasizing this, but especially for BIPOC men, right? Because one thing that I realized that I held a lot of shame and guilt for many of the relationships that I've had with the women in my life for a long time.
Hmm.
And it was to the point where even until as recently as 18 months ago, I didn't realize that I was actually holding on to guilt or shame around it.
Hmm.
But how this would manifest was I noticed that I actually wouldn't share parts of myself with the women that I was in
Mm.
romantic relationships with, because it was like, oh, there's like something wrong about this. Or,
Huh.
and for me, that's as a representation of, oh, there's some energy around that. There's something that I have guilt or shame around. And
Huh.
until I was actually able to get complete around that, it's actually put me in a position where I can actually share and really talk about the things that I've done, not as a representation of the man who I am, but it's a part of my story.
Huh.
And I think this is a, I mean, we've talked about a lot of important things. This might be honestly one of the most important ones. It's
Mm.
just this ownership of like what you've been through. And in a society, in a world where, again, we've talked about this, we're in the Instagram era. We only show and talk about the positive and great things. We give a
Mm.
lot of attention to the light, but we actually don't acknowledge the shadow, which all of us have and all of us have been through. And I think suppressing shadow or ignoring it,
Mm.
gosh, like it's hard to be a man of integrity if you're actually not willing to be with all parts of yourself.
Mm.
And there's a power that comes from just owning all parts of your experience. And to be able to say, yeah, I used to have a gamification relationship with women, like it, right. And like I've learned from that and I've grown from it. It's not a representation of who I am. And if somebody says that and be like, oh, well, you did that, then you're right. Then you just may not be aligned with me. And it is my truth. Like
Mm.
it's part of my story. I can't change it.
Mm.
Right. And it's how do I choose to be as a relationship to it? And also not making myself wrong for like what I did. Like I've forgiven, I've gotten complete with myself. So I'll land the plane there because there's again different tentacles we can go to on that.
That's awesome, man. And I know, we talked about Landmark, and I think you've taken
Yeah.
form as well. But
Yeah.
I think that was the moment where during Landmark, which is this course for everyone who doesn't know, it's a bunch of different self-development courses. But I think the thing I appreciate still to this day about Landmark is every course I've taken, I was able to forgive myself and let go of the past and not make what I did wrong and just accept it and then move on. Right. So I was able to reach out to pretty much all of my exes and all of the people that we had a falling out with, and then was able to complete that chapter so that I could love myself more and just be more present. And it was probably like one of the most beautiful things I did. Not only like for myself, obviously, but like for other people too. It was good to just to like check in, see how they're doing, and just talk about these shadows that I was too afraid to bring up. And then when I brought it up, like it was great because the story that I made about who I was way far worse than the reality, right? And the forgiveness was key on both
That's
sides.
such a bar. That's such a bar. Because it's like we create a story around ourselves in our minds. And guess who's really good at justifying the story in our minds? We are. So it's almost this process of, right, how these stories can impact how we choose to engage, how much we allow ourselves to be seen,
Mm.
right? I mean, and think about it. If there's parts of yourself that you think are ugly or you think are wrong or bad, you're less likely, and at least in my experience, to want to openly share and give access to all parts of you.
Mm.
And then that's not just that's not all of the experience of you,
Mm.
because we are all of it. So I
Hmm.
think that's such a huge point. So kudos to right, well, being in Landmark and also sharing it with me. Actually, you're the reason that I went through my Landmark as well. So I had a similarly powerful experience around it. So thank you. And yeah, this idea of forgiveness and letting go and getting complete around the things of the past so that the past does not influence you, I want to say negatively, but kind of negatively moving forward, I just think
Mm.
is essential.
Yeah. And clearly you've done so many different programs, you coach for so many different, you've done retreats all over the world. I'm curious as to, what's prompting that like hunger, that curiosity, right? Because you would think a person of your success and it sounds like you're in a really good place right now from who you're being, I can tell. What is prompting you to continue on that path of like self-discovery when, I'm sure there's days where it's going to be tough and you don't feel like being vulnerable that day, or whatever it is, right? You're like, but you still stay true to your journey.
Mm. I'm trying to decide if that's a loaded question or a really simple question. I'll answer it like this. For one, I like the analogy of, you heard of like when kids graduate high school, they think they know it all. And then you go to college and you graduate college. You're like, okay, like, yeah, like, I know a little bit. And then you go to get your master's. And then you're like, all right, I know a little thing about a little thing. And then you get a PhD. You're like, I actually know almost nothing. And I know very, 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 very little or a lot about one specific thing. And so I kind of equate that to this idea of getting to know yourself. And I think it's outside of your choice and your relationship with faith. I think it's the most important question that you can answer, and that will have the biggest impact on your lived experiences. Who are you? And it takes time to be with that. And I don't look at it as just like this one definite truth. I think there's layers and there's nuances to anything. And answering the question of who are you is going to influence who your partner is going to be, who you're being to attract the type of person that you want. And like, again, as a man who's 34 and a half years old right now, was recently out of a long-term relationship, it's this idea of, well, am I being the person that's going to attract the partner that I want? But if you're not connected to your truth and you're actually emitting something else, you're probably going to attract something else. So again, there's all of these different elements of it. So for one, it's just it's one of those things in my experience, once your eyes are open to it, it's hard to close it again. And I also don't, well, as being a wellness practitioner, my own personal development and growth is also aligned with the growth of just like my business.
Yeah.
But it's just, I've just had a lot of empowerment and truth from just being more deeply connected to myself. And it's just it's a cool place to be. So I think the simple answer of it is, as I'm getting more clear on the man that I claim to be, being connected to my truth is essential. And I think up until this point, even just recently, I think I've been like, all right, I would assess I'm been about like 85% into my truth, which is great. I've had a lot of great results from that. And there's an impact to being 85% into your truth, to embodying your truth 100%. And that's the specific chapter that I'm in my journey right now. Well, what does it actually look like to make that next step of embodiment?
Wow, that's pretty deep. And I also hear that it's okay not to be at 100% all the time, right? There's going to be days where we're off, or there's going to be outside influences, and that's okay too, right? Like, we don't have to be perfect every single day, right?
Totally. Well, for me, how I say that 100%, it's more of like a being thing. It's not like one thing that I do is like, oh, now you're not in truth, right? It's more so of like how I'm showing up. And it's not about perfection per se, but there is a commitment that I have to live a life that's in my truth. And am I Jesus? No. So am I going to have breakdowns all of the time? And can still have breakdowns in your truth. Like, it's a part of life. So it's not, I appreciate you mentioning that, because it's not intended, at least in my experience, to be a performative thing, but it's more of I hope you hear, like, there is an intentional stand for an experience of myself that I'm looking to bring. And that is the bigger thing that I'm focused on.
Love that. Well, I think that's a good place to I think that embodies this whole episode nicely in a line or two. Well, Austin, I want to acknowledge you for who you're being in the world, the intentionality, the impact that you have with each person, each human being you come across, your vulnerability, the depth of your conversations, and just the way you approach life, and just your commitment to being of service and for helping other men live integrous lives of authenticity, of their truth, and stepping into their values, and stepping into their greater selves through connection, love, and sharing. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Davidson. It was really beautiful to hold space with you again, and just have another just embodied conversation. And what I'm really present to is just how much deeper we're into in our respective journeys since the last time that we talked about, even though it was like 2 years ago, whatever it was. It feels like it was 10 years ago. And so it was really great to be connected. And I think that's the beauty around this type of work. And so, I mean, we're still the same essential experience of Austin and Davidson, but there's just this more refined nuance and connection to a specific experience. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that will look like in another 18 months, or we'll see what it looks like. There's so many things that I think are really important to just have conversation around, especially for BIPOC men. And so I'd like to also just share one thing before we wrap is one big truth that's been coming up in my space over the last about year or so is really cultivating safe spaces for BIPOC leaders. And I am cultivating a couple different containers right now. One is, the first one's called the Man Cave, and it is a free virtual weekly call. And it's specifically for BIPOC men. And it's really to talk about what is the experience of being a BIPOC man like. So we talk about masculinity, race, identity, and this essential question of what is our truth and what's our respect to embody that. And I'm specifically mentioning that here, well, as another BIPOC man, and I know you are, much of your community is BIPOC listeners. I think it's essential to be able to have conversations like we're having right now and being in a safe space in order to do that. Like, I think maybe listeners, if I was listening to this a few years ago before I got into this, I'd be like, how are they doing this? Like, wait, they're being what? And so I have a lot of reverence to that. We have to also consider that a lot of people who look like us haven't had the same opportunities to do this inner work and may not have a safe access to it. So creating safe, inclusive spaces is really important for me. So it's a free offering. I have it Tuesdays at 12 Eastern. I'm sure I can share that in the show notes.
Okay.
And additionally, I also have an accountability group that I run every quarter of the year. It's a 12-week program. And think of this as like a higher gradient. And this is, again, specifically for Black and brown men of color. And we make weekly declarations, and we get the opportunity to check in on each other and say, how did we fulfill on our declarations? And not from a place of performance, you either did or you didn't, but what's the actual learning into this? And for us as men, what's this process of being able to lean on others in community as we're doing the things that we're doing? I don't know about you, Davidson, but oftentimes I can be in like my own right and actually not sharing the things that I'm up to. And I think there's part of that is also just how I've learned to be a man, and how much more fulfilling life is when you actually get to share what you're creating in your progress with other men. I'll land the plane with this on both of these. I'm really touched by how just being in a space with other men like that, how that can be inspiring in itself, right? And just hearing what another man's up to or another man's vulnerability for people who look like us, it's just impossible to understand how that may influence another. So again, it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and just in line with this conversation, I wanted to put this out here and just have it in the ether for anybody who sees a possibility for themselves in deeper community.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's great that you're creating that safe space. I do think, I mean, we all know that people of color go through different challenges, right? And whether it's societal, whether it's performance, the way we show up, sometimes it has to be more performance. Like that's the quote unquote value that society has labeled us sometimes as someone who is produces results, right? And I love what you said about just hearing another man like go through being vulnerable and seeing what, just having that community and that being part of a tribe makes a world of a difference. So thank you once again for who you're being in the world. It's inspiring.
Thanks, Davidson. Thank you for holding space for me and just for being the friend that you've been in my life. I promise this will be the last thing that I say before we wrap. It's amazing while in this work, I've noticed that the relationships that I've made now in the past few years, the depth in those relationships are deeper in some instances than people that I've known for 15 years.
Wow.
And so it's this incredible experience of what happens when you actually show up and you allow and give yourself. Like, this is an experience of intimacy. And I just really want to acknowledge you for being such a powerful clearing for that too. And again, we've only known each other for maybe 3 years now.
Yeah.
And the things that we have explored Oh my gosh. Like it's been, I'd love, and my stand is to have this be the norm for all the conversations that I have with men.
Mm,
So thanks for
love that.
modeling that and just being who you are.
Whew, I just got chills. I know we keep it, I agree. Like, you know, folks that are a part of the coaching community or folks that are like are not afraid to have these vulnerable conversations, whether it's in small groups or discussions with folks like yourself, or you know, either one of us are facilitating those conversations. Like you're right. There are folks who literally like, you know, whether it's that 1 year to accomplishment coaching, know me better than the 30 years that I've had of family members who I spend Christmas and all that, you know, hundreds of hours together. But yeah, there's nothing like just being open and honest and just talking about like, hey, like this is what I'm going through. You know, I cried last night and this is kind of like what's going on in terms of like I got rejected from this job and this job and this job. And this is how I feel, you know, and holding space, like not trying, like not making any, you know what I mean? Because I think we all try to like make it go away, or you know, we say things that's like, oh, it's okay, you'll be fine. Like, you know,
Mhm.
it's like in just holding space that it's okay to have those emotions and not, you know, because when I made a video recently where I was crying, like, you know, and I have 17,000 LinkedIn followers, right? And it was very vulnerable, right? And I was crying for like 3 minutes and I was just like, hey, this is what's going on. Like, I just don't feel great. And this is just, and this is why. And
Mhm.
I was blown away. I had, you know, like 50 people text me and they're just like,
Wow.
dude, like, you know, I'm here for you. Like, you know, hit me up if you ever want to chat through it a little bit more. And it's just like, you know, and I've had some people that reached out and said like, hey, you should probably remove that, you know, because
Mhm.
like if your next hiring manager reads that, that could be a red flag that like, hey, maybe he doesn't have the fortitude or the resilience or the grit to make it as an enterprise seller. And I was like, dude, like this is the purest form of expression of who I am. And if that's going to piss off a hiring manager, like maybe I don't want him to be my manager or her to be my manager, you know?
That's standing for an experience, right? And look at the power of that. Like I'm going to post, this is my truth. And if that means that somebody's not going to want to hire me because I express and show emotion, then it's probably not the place for me. And I can own
Right.
that, right? Now that's a powerful place as opposed to, I don't know if I'll put this on there. So kudos to you. I haven't seen that video yet, and I will be going out there to go and give it some love too. So it's just
Oh,
it's really powerful, Davidson.
oh,
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll put for a pin for our next conversation, maybe we just deep dive on relationships. Like I'm talking about
oh,
friends,
let's go.
family, romantic partners, because there are just so many ties to where relationship is one of the greatest clearings to show the impact, I think, of a lot of this work and our willingness just to be all of ourselves with
Hmm.
the people that it feels the most vulnerable to do it because we want them to like us back. So it takes a tremendous amount of, it's almost counterintuitive. It actually takes more courage to show up fully with the people that you really, really love,
Hmm.
right? Because there's the impact, well, like, are they going to be aligned with your truth? And what's the process of like aligning it as opposed to just like, well, if they're not like it, then I'm just going to bounce. I don't want to leave that person. I want to be tight with my dad or my brothers or my partner. So just we'll sprinkling that in for perhaps the next conversation.
Yes, yeah, that could be a 2 hour conversation in itself.
Oh Lord, I know. All right, we'll go. We'll for real app here. Thank you again for having me on, Davidson. It was a magical conversation. And again, it's always great to be with you.
Amazing. Thank you, Austin.